And we're going to open up the hearing for SB 268 FN, and we're going to listen to the prime sponsor. Welcome, Senator.
I'm on. You got me. Okay. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Senator David Waters, introduce Senate Bill 268, and I'll give just a slight background before I go into the details of the bill. As you know, we've been talking about offshore wind since Governor Sununu called for the formation of a Gulf of Maine offshore wind task force, and so we've taken a variety of steps to try to prepare what we need to do to be ready for offshore wind as it is developed. As you may recall, we had the first meeting of the Gulf of Maine Task Force a year ago last December, and it was December 2019. And it is likely there will be a next meeting of the task force to try to move forward the siting selection process and other aspects of it sometime in March or April. And there is an acceleration of offshore wind development off the New England coast, and it is certainly coming to the Gulf of Maine. So really that suggests that New Hampshire needs to do a couple of things. One is to look at the whole energy side, the economic development side, and the other is to look at the environmental side. And the state of New Hampshire, as you know, can exert its regulatory authority over waters out to 3 miles, and then federal waters in that zone is from 3 to 200 miles. There is a federal process called consistency, where we may declare that New Hampshire has certain economic and fishing and environmental interests out to the 200-mile limit as they can demonstrate them, and then having declared consistency, then we can be part of the regulatory process. There is a federal statute, which you'll see referenced here, by which it's 15 CFR 930.53 and CFR 923.84. So this is not just something we can invent. It is under a process that is established here. But we have the authority to do that, and it seemed to me, in talking with people in Fish and Game and DES, that this would set us up very well. Some other states have taken this route, so that we will be able from the very get-go to protect our fishermen, to ensure that our subsurface environment out there in those waters is protected for our economic, our maritime, and other interests as well. This is an existing authority that we have through our coastal program, and you will recall, I hope as well, that we had the federal coastal program been operating for a number of years, and we put that in statute last year. And so we have it in statute, and that was an important step in being able to use this process. So if you turn to the bill on the first page, it says that the Public Utilities Commission, which will ultimately deal with offshore wind purchase power agreements and contracts, that it take into account what the environmental and fisheries findings are through this process. And then it uses the existing coastal fund that we set up last year as part of the establishment of the coastal fund, so that it could receive federal and other grants and funds, that if there are funds for mitigation of impacts to wildlife, fisheries, natural resources, tradition or existing water-dependent uses, we would have a place for that money to go, and then be hereby an advisory group would determine the best use of such funds to make our fishermen whole and to otherwise protect them. Then we get down to the bottom of the first page here, and this sets up the consistency declaration, and as we must under the federal statute, defines what the analysis of those interests are and how that analysis will be conducted so that we can justify declaring state regulation here. So this will require some resource mapping and analysis, some determination of impacts to the resources or uses from the proposed activity. Now, one thing I will mention connected to this is that Assistant Commissioner Sanborn, in his role at DES, has been working with other coastal states that have been brought together by the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management to establish for New Hampshire and each state a stakeholder process in these areas. And we're required to do that under the BOEM process. It's a very extensive process, and it would fit very well in and be run in parallel paths and as necessary to doing what we're doing as well, because that will be the vehicle for a lot of the stakeholders to be able to come together and provide some of the information that's going to be needed here. And then down at the bottom of the page here, about studies and mitigation, help to define us, what do we know, what do we need to know, how do we determine what kind of mitigation activities can be justified under consistency and what will be the basis for them. So I don't mean to get so technical on it. I think the bottom line here is that we have the possibility of using this authority to protect our fisheries, to act proactively on our environmental issues out there. There's been as you may be aware, a great deal of concern of fishermen in other states where offshore wind has come along. There have been lawsuits and so on and so forth. And I think New Hampshire, from the get-go, has said, we're going to listen. We're going to listen to the fishermen. We're going to listen to people who have economic interests out there, and we will do what we can to ensure that they're heard and that we have in place the processes to protect those interests. So, Mr. Chairman, that is the introduction of the bill.
Thank you, Senator. Are there any questions from the committee? Senator Gatta.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Waters, excellent presentation. I have a couple of questions.
Yes.
Terrorism and security, literal physical security for these offshore platforms. This bill doesn't address that, and I'm suspecting it might be federal, but is there a way that we should perhaps try to develop some state oversight of that?
Thank you for your question. It's Coast Guard and Homeland Security. I imagine it'd be coordination between federal Homeland and state Homeland. But this, what we're able to do under this consistency provision and those federal provisions there is related to these areas.
Okay, so we would anticipate, follow-up, thank you,
Yeah.
that Homeland Security would probably make those inroads into security for the platforms and so forth. Okay.
And thank you, Senator. We're not the first. The Gulf of Maine is not the first area developed, and the massive developments in the Bight of New York, off southern New England, Virginia, North Carolina, now the whole West Coast. So that there's going to be the Coast Guard and Homeland Security is going to have a lot of work that they have done by the time we're doing our development. But it's a good concern. It's a good question. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So down on line 23 and 4 and 5 on page 1, we talk about charge not to exceed 10% on the monies collected. Do you have any sense of how much this fund might have? Have we looked at any other states? And is 10% an appropriate number?
Well, I don't. It's possible some others behind me will have some sense of what mitigation estimates may have been made if at this point for, say, Vineyard Wind or other fields, they are just getting going down there, and there are some cases in court about it right now brought by the ROTA, which is a fisheries association. New Hampshire fishermen are part of that as well. I think the 10% figure seemed a pretty reasonable overhead, whatever is there. And,
thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Perkins-Booker.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Senator Waters, for presenting this. So just a couple questions. I know in your presentation you were talking about certain studies that were required prior to consistency being available. And so does this bill just do the studies, or is this provision on the bottom of page 1, lines 29 and 30, that continues on to page 2, is the geographic location description described in the CFRs the consistency measure? Could you just explain the mechanism for consistency?
Yeah, and I think it's possible that Steve Kuchar, if he's behind me here, will be able to talk more about this. But see, this is a process. Once initiated, it's a process.
Okay.
And so that we're required to provide the evidence through, fisheries management histories and biomass mapping, subsurface mapping, and also talking to fishermen and see where traditional fishing grounds have taken place. That's the evidence that you bring forward. And that's why the so-called GLD and other things are mentioned to fall out from that. So it's part of the process under consistency.
Okay, a follow-up if I could share. Yeah, thank you, that's really helpful. Does this bill authorize them to seek consistency, or would that be a follow-up piece of legislation? This is just the studies.
As I said, the authority to do consistency
Yeah.
is there. This
Okay.
bill says do it.
Okay. Okay. And then one more question, if I may. I know we're appropriating the money, or we're creating a fund, to collect these monies to put into. Could you talk a little bit about the process for developing this fund and how you kind of chose its purposes?
Yeah, thank you, Senator. This fund already exists. We authorized it last year when we authorized the coastal program. And so, the definition of the fund is already in statute. And it is an existing vehicle then that is capable of receiving such funds. And then the bill sets up the process whereby if such funds are received, how they'll be equitably distributed and used.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much, Senator.
Thank you.
Josh Elliott?
Mr. Chairman, it might be more helpful to the committee if the committee hears from DES prior to the Department of Energy. I think be able to answer some of the more technical questions.
All right. DES. Yep. Mr. Sanborn.
Morning, all. For the record, Mark Sanborn, Assistant Commissioner, New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services. Just wanted to provide a couple of comments about the origins of this bill. Really appreciate the sponsor, Senator Waters, all the work we've done. I'll start with this. Whether you fully support the idea of New Hampshire moving forward with offshore wind, whether you're just trying to figure it out or whether you already have concerns with it, this bill is something you should still support, because this bill is about protecting New Hampshire's interest. As a coastal state, we have certain ability with the federal government to claim federal consistency to make sure our interests are addressed outside the 3-mile range in federal waters. And that's really the purpose of this bill, is to make sure, but part of federal consistency is you have to be claiming a state statute to claim the federal consistency. So if we don't have these laws talking about how we would handle impacts to commercial interest, environmental concerns, etc., we can't claim federal consistency. So that's really what this bill is about. It's about getting on record in a state statute how we would handle offshore wind. So we know it's going to be further than 3 miles out. This is going to be in federal waters. So this is about making sure we have a seat at the table, regardless of what any of the other states or the federal government does. So we, DS is strongly supportive of it. Quite frankly, we were a big reason that Senator Waters brought this forward. The coastal program is run through DES. It's our office that would work with NOAA and BOEM to assert federal consistency if it came to that point. And then just address a couple of technical questions. Because they're in federal waters, the Coast Guard would be in control of the national security and the security interests. As maps are developed, part of the process with BOEM is siting process, and a big part of that is developing the maps And part of that is identifying the areas that wouldn't work for offshore wind, and that's done in conjunction with DoD, Coast Guard, et cetera. So they're involved in the process from the siting, and then of course, if there were issues, they would work with the state Homeland Securities for any security issues. On the question of the fund, no two state, or at least to this point in the U.S., have been identical. Right now, BOEM, God, using acronyms, the language of the bureaucrat, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, which is under the U.S. Department of Interior, is in the process, after a lot of encouragement from the state, of trying to develop national guidance on, particularly because the commercial fishing industry has been, particularly impacted when offshore wind has been deployed, and all the states wanting, whether they believe offshore wind is an important part of their policy goals, still want to do a better job addressing those concerns. So BOEM is in the process of developing national guidance on the best way to approach addressing compensatory mitigation, particularly with commercial fisheries. And we're part of a 9-state effort here in the Northeast, which involves every coastal state with the exception of Delaware, from Virginia to Maine, working with a group called the Special Initiative on Offshore Wind. BOEM had tapped them to work with states that wanted to work together. That's been a great source of information for us. Massachusetts and Rhode Island, 2 states that have moved forward with offshore wind, have been a part of it. We've been able to get some great lessons learned, and it's been a big part of what BOEM's doing. So just gives you some background on the bill, why we were so important, and I'll end with, like I said, I don't view it as my job to tell the public, stakeholders, elected officials, what policies should be pursued, but we did want to make sure we were doing everything to protect the state interests. However, the policymakers and the citizens want to move forward with public policy. So I'll end it with that, and happy to answer any questions.
Senator Waters with a question.
Yeah, thank you. Well, as much a comment, in my kind of scrambled introduction, I did neglect to offer forward thanks to the Assistant Commissioner, and also to the great team at Energy, Josh Elliott, Chris Elms, and then in DES, working with the Assistant Commissioner, Ted Deers and Steve Kuchar, and then also, participation from Cherie Patterson, the Fish and Game, and Eric Chapman of New Hampshire Sea Grant, and many others. This is an important all-hands-on-deck kind of move to get this into statute so that we can take advantage of the authority that the federal government will give us. So I just wanted to, give a shout out. This has been a good team effort, and I think it's something that's going to help New Hampshire. So that wasn't really a question, but thank you.
Yeah, well, I'll just say it's been great. Senator Waters has been a great partner. We've utilized the Offshore Wind Commission that the senator chairs as a great forum. He's let us a couple times use it because it's a regular scheduled public meeting, so it's a great opportunity if we need to do a public meeting. He's been so gracious. So it's been a great team effort among agencies, but across branches as well.
Other questions? Senator Guida.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner, you used the term compensatory. That to me invokes visions of state funds, perhaps, or federal funds. How is that?
No, so your envisioning of funds are correct, Senator. The source of those funds, again, there is no specific federal rule about how, if any, compensatory mitigation is delivered. So BOEM has an expression. They say, avoid, minimize, mitigate. And the commercial fishing industry has asked it to be avoid, minimize, mitigate, compensate. And is the way they like to phrase it. At this point, the way it works is the developer and whichever states are the leasing state, on behalf of their interests, both commercial and public, negotiate what will be what will be the result of the deployment of offshore wind, and that goes for sometimes developers put money into workforce development for the state, and a part of those negotiations are for negatively impacted commercial interest, how they concentrated, and what would be the source. I think at this point, while I'm not predicting the future, if any of the states moves forward with legislation, with leasing, I think it very highly likely that given the lessons we've learned, a big part of a developer coming to an agreement with a developer would be from their source of funding, finding a way to compensate commercial losses.
Thank you.
Senator Perkins Quokka.
Thank you, Mr. Sanborn. So just a couple questions. Has there been any discussions with neighboring states about they're also implementing consistency?
Yeah, so like I said, a couple efforts. We joined 9 states. That special initiative on offshore wind was being tapped by BOEM, was the result of 9 states coming together saying we want to, we want BOEM to take a bigger role in giving guidance on compensating. And that resulted in them. So the Special Initiative on Offshore Wind is a privately funded group that is housed in the University of Delaware. It's a nonprofit, so they can, they're very good at facilitating conversations. So that was one way we've worked with the folks. Like I said, it led to BOEM actually going out with a request for information for all stakeholders, states and private sector, looking for information. We've also done it through the Tri-State Task Force, sort of specifically here in the Gulf of Maine. We meet regularly as states and with BOEM having the conversations. And that's why I feel pretty comfortable with the statement I made a second ago. We have a very good idea of all our states' approach and wanting those approaches to be consistent.
Okay, thank you.
Follow up?
Chair, if I may. Yeah, that's helpful. Just because I do think we want to make sure we're representing New Hampshire's interests and we have a vehicle, by which to do that and to invest in our workforce. But I just want to make sure we're not, I think it makes sense for us to do this in step, with other states around us, just so we don't create any disincentive to develop off the New Hampshire waters. On page 2 of this bill, in what would be RSA 485.16, talks about the coastal program in coordination with the Fish and Game Department and other relevant state agencies shall determine whether additional studies and or mitigation are required under proposals. Any required studies or mitigation shall be included in agreements with developers of offshore wind energy and the power purchase agreement. So I was just wondering, sounds like you've been talking to other states about how this is unrolling for them. Are they entering into things like development agreements with the developers? Because, the PPA is the obvious way that the state would have to kind of put forth our interest, but I was just curious, what else you're seeing.
Yeah, so what'll happen is the BOEM will, we are going through what is now in the very early stages of the siting and leasing processes. Through BOEM. The siting is working with the states and stakeholders and federal agencies to identify the map of, in our case, the Gulf of Maine, of mainly identifying areas of concern, either commercial, security, environmental, negative impact on habitats, etc. The leasing process is the process of, in addition to the siting, having the necessary conversations with the stakeholders involved to identify all the issues, to make sure all the relevant research has been done, whether it be environmental, socioeconomic, impact on other mammals and fisheries, and on habitats. And then BOEM at the end of that process will release the opportunity for developers to come in. So one of the states or the states together will put out go forward with a leasing application, and if it gets approved, BOEM and those states would work with developers putting in proposals to move forward with offshore wind in the designated areas that have been deemed appropriate for offshore wind. So that's the point when the negotiations start to happen between the developer and state or states involved.
Okay, follow up, if you don't mind.
Sure, of course.
No, I think that's helpful, and but that lease is it's a federal lease with a federal agency, right? So where's the sort of nexus?
No, the lease would be with the state. The state would apply for the right to go forward with a leasing application through BOEM.
Okay, so is that what this consistency change does? Is that it makes
So the biggest part it does is, let's say Maine decides, we appreciate the efforts we've done with the other states, but we have a vision for Maine and a leasing application. Federal consistency allows us to say how you're moving forward. That's going to impact our commercial fishermen fish there. We feel it might impact negatively environmentally. It gives us the ability to at least have a seat at the table if another state moves forward in the Gulf of Maine with things that would negatively impact New Hampshire stakeholders and commercial interests.
Okay, thank you.
And just for the public's edification, what is BOEM?
Yeah, Bureau of Ocean Energy Management under the U.S. Department of Interior.
Appreciate that, just because.
I know. I use the language of the bureaucrat. I know.
That's a nasty word, bureaucrat. No, I'm kidding. Go ahead, Senator.
Thank you, Mark. So, simply put, as I understand this document, this legislation establishes us formally as stakeholders in this process. Without this document, we would not be able to perhaps protect the interests of New Hampshire fishermen, environment, whatever.
You got it. And environmental interests, our commercial interests, our port, our cargo, you got it. And that's why I go back to where I started, Senator. Whether you're for offshore wind, whether you're against it, whether you don't know, this legislation, I believe, should be supported by all of us because it makes sure we have a seat at the table regardless of what the federal government or our neighboring states do.
Further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much for your
Thank you,
testimony.
Mr. Chair. Thank you, members.
Rep. Peter Sumish. Forgive me for not pronouncing the last name right. Is it Somish? Somsich.
Mr. Chairman, it's Somsich.
Thank you.
And thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, fellow senators, for being here. My dentist used to say, we don't have to brush all of our teeth, only the ones we want to keep. The state of New Hampshire only does not need to be involved with offshore wind. But if we wish to benefit from it economically, for energy security, and for good jobs for New Hampshire residents, then we need to participate. New Hampshire right now is already behind where our neighbors Maine and Massachusetts are currently. A power purchase agreement is the first way of making a statement that we want to be part of this process. During the next 10 years, offshore wind is positioned to create an enormous impact on the coastline of Maine, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts. The offshore wind manufacturers, currently all in Europe, are already looking and having discussions with business partners in the Northeast states to build and deploy offshore wind here in the United States. They went to manufacture in the United States instead of shipping everything from Europe. And right now, as you can understand, these turbines, which are sometimes as much as 100 yards in diameter can't be shipped except by boat. And so you're not going to ship this by train or by truck. So the most obvious thing is you have to manufacture it onshore and float it out where you're going to be deploying these things. And they're hoping that our coastline, our 3 states' coastlines are going to be those sites. New Hampshire stands to benefit greatly, I think, from the huge amount of energy that would be generated, as well as the companies in New Hampshire and the jobs they could create as a follow-up to that deployment. That is why we need to be at the table. And we already have a maritime industry in our states, and lots of people who are comfortable working on the water and working with maritime type industries. So we already have a prelude to that workforce that will be needed. Issues around the New Hampshire maritime industry, such as the fishing industry, should and must be addressed to protect and mitigate any impacts. But we must be at the table to do that. By participating in a power purchase agreement, New Hampshire can also demonstrate that we are interested in being at that table. So I think, and I've been part of this process for a couple years now. I remember talking to OSI about this when for them it was totally new. But I think that offshore wind is an exciting opportunity for our state, and we should not let it pass by. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your testimony. Questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much, Representative.
Thank you.
We'll try it again. Josh?
Morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. For the record, Josh Elliott, Director of the Division of Policy and Programs at the Department of Energy. The Department of Energy is in support of this bill. I think Assistant Commissioner Sanborn, as well as Senator Waters, laid out why this is so important to New Hampshire. I think the Assistant Commissioner laid it out perfectly in saying, you know, whether you're in favor of it, whether you're opposed, or whether you're ambivalent about this, this gives us this is another tool in the toolbox. I know later, not to fast forward in your agenda, I know later today we'll be talking about siting. Essentially what this comes down to is siting, and it's, if you think of it in terms of for siting for energy infrastructure on land is relatively easy in terms of, you have property rights, you have, who's impacted, things like that. When you get out into essentially what are common areas in state and federal waters, it gets incredibly complicated because nobody, it's the federal government that technically owns the sea floor. There are a lot of other interests out there in using those federal waters, as the Assistant Commissioner laid out, whether it's commercial, whether it's recreational, and there's also environmental concerns involved with all of those. And again, this gives us that tool to be a seat at the table and to make sure that it is done correctly and any of those impacts to New Hampshire interests are properly accounted for.
Thank you. Questions from the committee? Seeing none.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And Kelly?
Senator Waters, excuse me, Senator Avard, I wasn't planning on speaking
Oh,
today.
my apologies. You're right. You weren't. But you just did, but you like the bill.
Good morning, everyone.
All right. I don't have anybody else here who wants to speak on it. Is there anybody in the audience that wants to speak on the bill? And with that, we will close the hearing.
All right.
And so the next bill, I'd like to exec it right away.
I'm
if folks would.
back.
Is there any problem with this bill? Do I have a motion to move into exec real quick?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, seeing none. Is there a motion on the bill?
Second.
Second by Senator Gaida. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed, seeing none. Seconded by
Second.
Senator, okay. Motion to move on consent. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none. Senator Waters, would you want to take this out? All right. Is there a motion to move out of exec?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none. Wonderful.
Hey, look
See?
at that. You got a win under your belt. Only 9:15.
Did you say he has a wind under his belt?
That's a good one. It's a good one.
Yeah, well, you're the one
I
said.
should have taken credit for that, but I did not say that.
All right, and we recognize Senator Waters.
Thank you,
Today
Mr.
is
Chairman.
Waters World.
Really? No.
Just saying.
I'm not as well paid. I'm not as well paid, okay?
Oh, is that right? But you are
That's for sure.
Nephew, that's what I know.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Senator David Waters, District 4, introducing Senate Bill 44, and you have before you a replace all amendment. On this, I believe, Daley, is that going around? Yeah. So I'll give you a moment to get a hold of that. It ends up being a very simple amendment, but let me just give a little background here. You know that we wrestled last year with the issue about what do we do about fostering economic development related to offshore wind, and what is our state policy going to be on power purchase agreements, renewable energy credits, and so forth related to those purchase power agreements and contracts and the arrival of this industry here. And I think we made a lot of good progress and discussion under that bill, a lot of good input from the governor, then OSI, now Department of Energy, and we decided to pause on that. And certainly we're not ready to move forward with any state mandates on energy. That was quite clear. So this year I began to say, okay, well, if we're not going to take that approach, what do we need to do to set us up so that we have transparency for the industry, for the utilities, for the public as to when this power arrives, how we're going to look at it, how we're going to judge it, and what kind of instructions we might want to give to the Public Utilities Commission. So the original version of this bill just said, all right, well, I'll lay that all into directions and requirements for the Public Utilities Commission when these contracts, power purchase agreements arrive at the commission, so they will have instruction from the legislature and the process that we developed to do that. It did seem, with more conversation with utilities and with the Department of Energy and others, that was maybe premature because we're probably a couple 3 years out. And so what I thought then would make sense is, okay, we have set up the Office of Offshore Wind in the Department of Energy. That was done in statute a few years ago. And so I thought a reasonable approach to do would to add to the duties of that office to establish a responsibility to advise the governor, state agencies, Public Utilities Commission, and the legislature on development of clean energy resources in the Gulf of Maine and the purchase of power by New Hampshire Public Utility from these resources, and to report on that. And this makes a lot of sense for a few reasons. We have that office. This is kind of what it's supposed to do, and it could then set up a process where stakeholders, utilities, developers, everyone else would have the opportunity to work through that when we get to that point, what advice, based, seeing what other states are doing, seeing what our state, how it would be advantaged by it, what they would recommend. And so you will see here that the areas that they're going to look at are similar to what were included in the original 440. The recommendations in Area A on starting line 18. What are the criteria? How should the PUC evaluate purchase power agreements for the procurement of electricity or hydrogen resources produced by wind turbines in the Gulf of Maine? How are we going to determine if something are commercially reasonable and cost effective? In this area, that's the bedrock for power purchase agreements in New Hampshire, are they cost effective and beneficial to the ratepayers in New Hampshire? So with this power, how do you figure out how to determine that is in fact the case? Are we going to get increased reliability, particularly now we're in winter spikes of natural gas? What criteria will we want to have in those contracts so that the utilities can really demonstrate, yeah, we're going to improve reliability here, and then also, the distribution process. This is going to require enhanced distribution system. That's clear for the region for all kinds of reasons, not just offshore wind. So how are we going to know that we're getting, reliable distribution system? The environmental benefits, how we're going to know in these purchase power agreements whether they have actually paid attention to that consistency process and to the interests of our fisheries. How will we determine that in fact is the case and what the developer wants to do? And then, because we're concerned about economic development, to have them look at what other states are doing and who have developed offshore wind and how we might serve our economic interests, our ports and economic development here. Secondly, as we just talked about in Senate Bill 268, recommendations concerning actions necessary to comply with consistency and mitigation recommendations. This is that other avenue that when we get to the power purchase agreement side, not just the BOEM site development and all that, but environmental review, but when we get to the actual power purchase agreement side, how do we make sure that that process is taking care of what was identified in consistency? And then thirdly, this issue of renewable energy credits, there's going to be a lot of them that are coming from this, and so how are they going to be used to benefit ratepayers? Who's going to have control over them? How should our state handle that issue? Every state is addressing the same kind of thing in that process. I thought timeline of 2024. I want to emphasize here and through my discussions with the Department of Energy over this that we're not envisioning some huge consultant things going to require consultants and hiring and all this. This is meant to be seen as the regular duties of this office, and that's why the 2-year timeline there, so they have plenty of time to decide what they want to, how they're going to approach this, and be able to coordinate across other agencies to get the information that they may need here, bring in utilities and others to talk about that. And that June 2024 is also meant to time when it may be likely that we're going to see the auctions held for the offshore wind in the Gulf of Maine. The federal delegation has sent a letter, such a cover letter to letter I sent for BOEM to say that we would hope that by the third quarter of 2023 the auction would be held. It looks more likely maybe the early part of 2024. But if the auctions are held around then that's an appropriate time that that's when the clock will start ticking for development and the power purchase agreement. So that's why that date is in there. I also will just mention kind of as an aside that in terms of help with this process, aside from the kind of coordination that Assistant Commissioner Sanborn is doing through that stakeholder process, that there is a group down in Massachusetts, a nonprofit down there that is offering a lot of technical support and advice to states doing this. And we are currently in discussions with Denmark, who has an offer to states to create MOUs to offer free technical assistance on this industry because they have such a long history and a basis of understanding of all the kinds of areas related to that. They've signed MOUs, most recently with Virginia, but also with NYSERDA, I think with California, and some other agencies to offer this kind of technical assistance, so that that might be something that could help us out as well as we move forward. And I think we'll have some kind of news about that MOU in the next couple of months. But so, Mr. Chairman, a long-winded way of saying that this, this is a good, transparent way of using that new office to do some work we need to get done.
Thank you, Senator, for your testimony and for all your hard work. We do appreciate it. I don't have anybody against this bill. Are there any questions from the committee? Senator Gaeta.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm hoping that the Department of Energy doesn't have the intention of purloining any more of our staff.
I don't know. I don't think they're going to send them back either, so. I can't answer your question, Senator.
All right. Thank you. Peter, Representative, are you back? Sonish? He's in the hall? Do you want to testify on it?
No, I mean, we're along with energy supportive of the new as amended.
Okay. Let's see, so, Josh Elliott. Welcome back. It sounds like a song.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Guida, to answer your earlier question, I have no plans on poaching any more staff. I would like Senator Morse to remain in Senator Morse's good graces.
Yeah, Daly just started, okay?
At any rate, for the record, Josh Elliott, Director of the Division of Policy and Programs over the Department of Energy. I'd like to thank Senator Waters for working with us on this amendment. We had a great conversation about it earlier this week. The department doesn't take any position on it, but I would like to say that we believe this can be done through the offshore wind office, that these are reasonable duties, and the study can be completed within the proposed timeline. We don't have any technical corrections or language changes to suggest from the department's point of view. Just in a small pitch for myself, completely unrelated, and I'm not trying to poach anybody, but we are actively recruiting for this position, so if anyone is interested or would like to come work for me at the department.
Does it pay more than $100?
I think I can safely say it pays more than $100.
And how do they contact you? Ladies and
Yeah.
This is a public service announcement. All right. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Josh, and so we're going to call another Josh. Welcome, Josh. Popular name.
Thank you. For the record, we did not plan that.
Oh, you did not plan what?
Bookending two Joshes.
Oh, that's all right.
So, well, Senators, for the record, my name is Joshua Reid from Associated Builders and Contractors. We represent about 260 contractors here in the New Hampshire area. And we want to, first of all, just say this is a great conversation about moving forward with wind energy. Having a greener economy, a greener alternative to fossil fuels is an excellent plan. And the ability to build such things would be very much welcome by a lot of the Granite State companies here in New Hampshire. This is definitely the right way to go as we shift away from fossil fuels. Obviously, it's a long transition, but wind will certainly be part of that. So we're very happy again to see that this bill is moving forward. And I didn't come out against or for this bill in part because, one, I heard there's an amendment. I hadn't read the full thing, quite frankly. And I just want to respect that process. But also, I just wanted to kind of talk a little bit about the procurement aspect of things for our industry, for construction. Some of the, it looks like it's kind of an approach here with Section 5 responding to solicitations pursued in this section. It sounds like effectively it's talking about sort of like a best value approach. And I think that's really great to see in their apprenticeship, encouraging local hiring, encouraging minorities and women, because those are all aspects of our community, I think, that are underserved in some regards. Construction is a very diverse workforce. It is becoming more diverse every day, but I think we could do more work to make it more diverse. And I'm very pleased in here to see actually about apprenticeship and training programs. For us and our contractors in New Hampshire, our contractors spent with zero tax dollars approximately $10 million in training over the last few years alone. Nationwide, our association does about $1 billion in training. Craft training, management training, upskilling people and bringing them in a pathway to the middle class. And I've raised all this because we're very passionate about training and providing opportunity for people. And I bring that up because in Section 4 of the bill on page 4, it talks about shall require a project labor agreement for this project. I don't think that there's a need to have a project labor agreement if we're talking particularly about apprenticeship and training in the other paragraph. If we want to talk about a PLA, I would first say some other states have done PLAs with wind, and I think New York, Connecticut, and Rhode Island have looked at using project labor agreements. But ultimately, has anyone checked in to see how successful those PLAs have delivered on the promises? And I know the answer is no. So I think before New Hampshire alters how we do procurement in our state, we need to evaluate whether or not a PLA makes sense. If it's something that you want to consider, I would just say maybe add it in as a stipulation underneath the solicitations as one of the metrics and say maybe that's a point you'd be considered as a contractor making an offer for this project. If a PLA is important, make that a point in the system that you're developing here rather than just making it a shall require. Because at the end of the day, shall require will preclude a lot of our local contractors from having an opportunity on this. And I know that there's been some conversations within this deliberative body about, well, PLAs, anyone can bid under them. Well, anyone can go play baseball, but if you're told the only way to play baseball is for the New York Yankees, it's going to turn off a lot of people. And that's what a PLA does effectively. I have a number of contractors who've worked under PLAs and can tell you firsthand how troublesome they can be for them. Some it works for them and they choose to do that privately on their own. But where it's mandated, I've had, for instance, a contractor who was a small business, a woman-owned trucking company. And the PLA said, you have to first hire from the labor hall, and then you can bring your own people in. She goes, well, I'm driving my truck, so you mean I can't drive my truck? I have to let someone else who doesn't own my truck, doesn't know my commitment to safety, drive my vehicle onto the job site and get it done. So things like that come up with PLAs, and I'm getting really in the weeds on that because I feel like I have to, because that's really why a lot of contractors choose not to bid under project labor agreement work, because it does disrupt their processes and their ability to work within how they've done work for a while. And secondly, when a PLA comes into place, it says you have to use an apprenticeship program that's tied to one particular apprentice program. Now, if I'm a contractor who has my own individual apprentice program already set up and recognized by U.S. Department of Labor, under a PLA, I have to mothball my apprenticeship program and utilize the one from the local labor hall, not my own. So it's arguably limiting the number of pathways of apprenticeship that come into play here. So those are some of the many concerns that we have with mandating or saying shall require a PLA. Make it optional. That's really our recommendation. With that, we would be fully supportive of this bill. In general, again, we're very supportive of wind energy. We think there's a lot of good jobs, and God knows we need a lot of that, and good opportunity that could come with that. So thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, Senator Waters.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sure. And just so you don't have to take your Tums after the hearing because of heartburn, that language has been replaced by the amendment.
Oh, thank you.
And you know, for a lot of good points you bring up.
Yeah.
But what it says here, you know, because of what you're saying, this bill says, yeah, lots of issues out there. Yeah. We're just going to look at it. And so the language here says, have and create and foster employment, training, manufacturing, other economic development in New Hampshire.
Awesome.
So that's the language in here. Yeah, we've got to look at workforce development for sure, and we want to get the jobs here for sure. But the replacement amendment here, which I hope you can get a copy of, now is saying that we're going to look at all these issues.
Thank you, Senator. Okay. I truly appreciate that. Thank you.
I'm sure that your participation in that process of looking at and thinking about those will be welcome.
Thank you. Yeah. And if I may, Senator, I want to let you know, we actually just launched a new apprentice program partnering with the community college system here in New Hampshire. I'd love to talk to you a little bit more offline, maybe appropriately about that. Great. I think it'd be great for you to learn about.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Further questions from the committee? Seeing none.
Thank you, folks.
I don't have anybody else to speak on this. Does anybody else want to speak on this particular bill? Nobody against it. So with that in mind, we will close the hearing. And are you all comfortable? I'm comfortable.
Yep.
I'm comfortable. Is there a motion?
Move into exec.
Seconded by Senator Waters. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Is there a motion?
I'll move up to pass.
Second.
Okay.
Excuse me. I'll move up to pass, and it's been second. Now I'll move amendment.
Yep.
0430S.
Second.
Discussion. Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none, so.
I'll move up to pass as amended.
Second.
Okay. Discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none, is there another motion?
Consent's
Come
fine with me.
on. Oh, yeah. Second.
Good. Okay, all in favor of consent?
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none. Senator Perkins Quokka, I know this is Senator Waters' bill, but would you like to take this one out?
Sure.
You're a co-sponsor.
Sure.
All right, if you don't mind. Give her some.
She's
Share the
got more
wealth.
salt water than I do.
Share the wealth. All right, and with that, is there a motion to move out of exec? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none. All right. So, are we too early or are we on time?
You're good.
Am I really? Oh, wow. Somebody was long-winded. Not me. Senator Gaida.
All right.
At this time, we will open the hearing on Senate Bill 367, recognize the prime sponsor, Senator Avard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and committee members. For the record, I'm Senator Kevin Avard, District 12. I'm here before you to introduce SB 367, relative to the regulatory status of advanced recycling manufacturing facilities. When this bill was brought before me, I was very happy to prime sponsor it with Senator Waters as a co-sponsor with me. This bill is about incentivizing private investment to come to New Hampshire and develop another tool for keeping plastic out of the landfills and advanced recycling facilities. I don't know if you remember last year when we were going over some of the bills, we were listening to some of the testimony about, the predicament of our landfills and how that there's an issue there, that there's a lifespan. And putting in some plastics into the landfills that cannot be recycled is just not an option for us. So this was thinking outside the box, and I was very happy that somebody's actually thinking outside the box for New Hampshire. There are others here who can speak to the specifics of the industry and how the advanced recycling works and the language of the bill. The goal of the bill is to establish a clear regulatory path for these types of recycling facilities to be treated as manufacturing facilities and not as solid waste facilities. 15 other states have passed similar regulations to meet with the intent to attract private investments to their states, and that would bring jobs, good jobs, in STEM fields and construction, as well as other ways to recycle hard-handled plastics. There are no such facilities in the Northeast, and so we want this type of manufacturing in New Hampshire. I have an amendment to 0195S that we worked out with the DES, the American Council of Chemistry Council. It deletes the definition of refuge as requested by the department, and it amends the language on page 4 regarding the authority of the department.
Yeah, do we have the amendment?
I'm not sure it has completely satisfied the department. Hopefully it does, but I believe we have some good language here. My goal is to pass the enabling language to help New Hampshire, and it can help our solid waste needs by diverting plastics from our landfills and help recycling and refuge of plastics and help our economy and bring some good manufacturing jobs in STEM fields. I think it's a win-win. It's a great bipartisan bill, and I'm going to defer all the questions for those who are here to testify on the specifics of the language, if that's okay. And thank you very much.
Are there any questions for Senator Avard?
Thank you.
Hearing none.
All right.
Thank you.
I don't. Okay.
You don't have the amendment? No, none of you have the amendment?
No.
Okay. See if I can give you a copy now.
He's got him.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir. You did a great job. I really appreciate that.
It was challenging.
I have one. Thank you. All right, and with that, Kirsten, welcome. Representing VIA in support of the bill. One of our trusted former employees who's been hijacked by BIA. Welcome.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Kirsten Koch, and I represent the Business and Industry Association, also known as BIA. We serve as a statewide chamber of commerce, and we represent over 400 members. I'm here today to express BIA's support for Senate Bill 367. This bill furthers environmental sustainability and brings economic benefits to the state of New Hampshire. This bill furthers the state's solid waste management goals by preventing traditionally hard-to-recycle plastics from going into New Hampshire landfills. Instead, this gives advanced recycling facilities the opportunity to manufacture these products into a variety of reusable materials. Additionally, this bill encourages advanced recycling facilities to come to New Hampshire for business, ultimately creating more jobs for the local economy. This bill provides regulatory certainty for advanced recycling facilities. The main function of these facilities is to manufacture new materials, not dispose of waste, so they need to be appropriated appropriately to be doing that. We believe that New Hampshire should welcome sustainable business and regulate advanced recycling facilities for what they are as manufacturers. BIA respectfully requests that this committee pass Senate Bill 367 because this bill would further environmental sustainability efforts and increase economic opportunities for New Hampshire. Thank you for your consideration of our support for this bill, and I'd be glad to try to answer any questions from the committee.
Excellent. Questions?
Yeah,
Senator Waters.
thank you. We had some conversation over this bill about whether or not there would be a way to emphasize that we wanted to have some of the source material from New Hampshire. So that it's not simply potentially just bringing in plastics from other states to process here, and that we, in effect, then would have done nothing to help our own issue. And I remember, talking about that and recommending that. I also had the concerns about making sure the DES had appropriate regulation. That's covered in the amendment. But would you see a way here? I don't think you can commit percentages or whatever, but would there be a way in this bill for the industry to make a commitment to efforts to source materials from New Hampshire sources?
Thank you for your question, Senator. I don't see us having any opposition to that. I think it's a great idea to further environmental sustainability in the state of New Hampshire, and like you said, ensure that we're removing plastics from landfills in New Hampshire.
And if I may, in looking through this, it's a little hard for me to see because so much about definitions of pyrolysis and gas, all these things, that it's a little hard. I can see why I see it here, but perhaps would the industry be able to help craft a purpose or a purpose statement that could include language that part of the purpose here is to address the recycling and solid waste crisis in New Hampshire by reducing plastics that are going to our landfills? I'm saying this out loud just so the chair, the sponsor hears it and others do.
Yes.
And they've all heard it, so you don't have to answer anything.
That was an easy question. Thank you, Senator.
You said yes. The head was shaking yes, so I had a great idea, didn't I?
Senator Gray.
This question might really be for Senator Waters, but I can't ask him a question right now.
Sure.
But since so many of our landfills actually take in refuse from other states, reducing this on a regional basis, not just New Hampshire, might be more appropriate. Would you agree?
Thank you for your question, Senator.
You're on the growth today, huh? All right, good for you.
Well, I do think this effort would contribute to reducing waste in all of New England. This has implemented this type of regulation in 15 other states, but it's not thoroughly present throughout New England. So I do think it would contribute to reducing waste that goes into landfills in the New England region as a whole.
And I did have one more question. Oh, go ahead, Bob.
Senator Gray.
Along that line, are we in any way able to mandate, well, we can't charge fees for out-of-state trash. Can we mandate that the recycling stream from these other states coming into New Hampshire segregate these particular plastics as a condition of using our landfills?
Thank you for your question, Senator. I believe maybe that would be better answered by DES.
Yeah, I think that, and they're here. Yeah, Mike probably answer that. Good question, though. Senator Waters.
Yeah, and this is just really, again, for the public record. My understanding is that unlike earlier proposals about these kinds of plants, that there's no intended use for these products as a fuel. It is meant to be a feedstock for manufacturing of more plastics. Is that correct?
I don't know the specifics on the use of the products, but I know that they can be used for, they're created into materials that can become decking products. I know in the past, for my own personal experience, I had a college graduation gown that was made from recycled plastic. So they can be turned into a wide variety of products these days.
Now, are you ready to vote on the bill? That's fantastic. Good for you. All right. Seeing no further questions? Thank you very much, Kirsten. Appreciate your testimony.
Thank you.
Mike Winsett, would you mind stepping up? Department of DES, welcome.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. DES is pleased to, for the record, my name is Mike Wimsatt. I serve as Director of the Waste Management Division for the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services. DES is in support of this bill. We did, to the credit of the folks who, ACC and others who worked on this, they came to us early. We had a lot of discussions. We did raise some concerns. They've addressed, I think, most of those concerns. There are a couple of lingering things that I don't think are fatal, but I think that I did want to share with the committee. Basically, the amendment that I think you have before you now, in its very last sentence on lines 11 and 12, basically says that, actually, go back to line 9 if you would. The department may make inspections of advanced recycling facilities to ensure compliance of post-use polymers are used as raw materials for advanced recycling. And then it goes on to say that failure to comply may result in classification as processing or treatment under the facility standards, and then it gives a rule citation. That was in response to concerns that DES raised about what I think is unlikely, but sometimes they pay us to think of the things that may not be that likely to happen, but if they do, they're a problem. And DES does encounter some of those situations. I think when a facility like this is operating and managing their materials well and doing well, there will be no reason to want to regulate them as a solid waste facility. We want to encourage that kind of work, and that's why we support this bill. However, it does come to our attention sometimes when things don't go well. So if you can imagine for a moment a facility like this that takes in many, many bales of baled recycled plastics, which may have food or beverage residues in them, and they store them outdoors over 3 acres, and then the facility goes belly up and there's no one there to watch it. And suddenly there are rats and mice and vermin and seagulls, and the neighbors who live right next door to the facility are really upset about it. So as they would call DES and say, what are you going to do about this? And normally for a facility like this, we would have no concerns about our authority because we could go in, even though it would be a permit exempt facility, even under our current regulations, it would still be a regulated facility. We'd still have all the inspection and enforcement authorities available to us to address the problem, and we would address it. In this case, where there's a very sweeping exemption from considering these things to be solid waste, we would struggle a little bit to figure out, all reasonable people could say, well, that's not a good situation, it shouldn't happen. But we would struggle to find the authority to go in and inspect it even against the wishes of the operator, which is likely what might happen, and then to do something about it and to have the appropriate enforcement authorities to address it. So earlier on in the process, we had suggested some language that would basically say, despite it not being regulated as a solid waste and that this just being looked at as a straight up manufacturing facility, in the event that EPA or DES would have the ability to go in just to enter inspect for the sole purpose of determining whether the storage of those materials is posing any substantial threat to human health or the environment, and if it found that they were, would have its available authorities to address that. To their credit, the bill's advocates have worked on this language instead, but to be honest, I'm not sure how to interpret this language. I think if I ran into the situation that I just described to you, and I was working, things didn't go well, and we weren't getting cooperation from the owner of the facility, I think I might have a hard time in working with the Department of Justice to figure out where our authority would lie, what we could do, and whether we could go in and address it. I may be wrong about that. I mean, it does seem to give us the ability to go in and inspect, but then it says you classify the facility as a processing and treatment facility, but it doesn't actually explicitly say, well, now the things are regulated as solid waste and you have your authorities to address it appropriately. So all I'm suggesting is that language may need a little cleaning up just to make it clear that those authorities exist or would exist in that situation. I want to emphasize, I wouldn't lie awake at night worrying about this. I think that the scenario I described to you is probably relatively unlikely, but it's not beyond the realm of possibility. And I'm just trying to make sure that if this bill moves forward, and we think it should, I want to make sure it moves forward in a way that doesn't put DES in a position not to be responsive to its citizens in the future in the unlikely event that something like that might occur. And with that, I'll have you take
Senator Waters
questions.
with a question.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Or did you have one first, Senator? Okay. So I just to have in the public record here that under the authority you have to regulate it as a manufacturing facility, you would be able to ensure that the siting and then other environmental concerns and so on would be addressed as they would be in any other manufacturing facility?
I'm sorry, you asking under current law?
Yeah.
Yeah, under current rules, a facility like this would be, the materials they accepted are still technically solid waste, but the facility, because of the nature of its activities and the fact that it's taking what you might describe as sort of market-ready recyclables, would not require a permit. So we wouldn't go through a permitting process. There are some very basic siting criteria associated with it, but not the same as would apply. It would not be treated as a permitted solid waste facility. It would really just be the universal facility standards that are in ENVSW 1000 are really broad, just basic requirements that apply to a facility.
So if I may, so basically it's a chemical processing plant.
That's a
and
fair statement.
We have those.
Yes.
In other areas.
Right, but under current regulations, a facility like this, because the materials it's accepting does have some additional standards under the solid waste rules that apply to it. If this bill passes, those go away.
And if I just may one more. So you heard my earlier question and my concern about how much is this actually going to help us if we don't have something in here about, part of the purpose statement, to help us reduce plastics. And a lot of these are currently non-recyclables, right? They're number 5s and the hard plastics.
They certainly could be.
Yeah,
Right.
so, and I mean, and frankly, isn't it the case that the states around us have bottle bills? And so they're taking care of some of their plastic stream that way. And also, Maine having passed extended producer responsibility, first in the nation, although they're about to be followed by other states, saying that anybody who brings any kind of these, plastics, glass, cardboard, what it is, the manufacturers the distributors bring any of that in the state are not going to be responsible for its recycling, disposal, and so on, and pay for it. So in terms of whether or not, having this here would really reduce a lot of the trash that's coming into our landfills, it maybe not in the same way as other areas of trash reduction. So that if we wanted to, since we don't have a bottle bill, we don't have extended producer responsibility, we got a lot of municipalities who would like to have a market and a place to take their hard plastics, and then there's the whatever has the chasing arrows that actually means something. That this, that if we had a way to say that part of the purpose here is to look to try to source in state. Is that something that you think would be reasonable, or you could help write up? Or
I certainly think that some language to encourage that would be appropriate and desirable. I guess I look at the way that New Hampshire municipalities manage their waste, and we do a really good job getting market-ready recyclables. I think that those municipalities and private businesses would really compete well in the marketplace. If a facility like this were to be opened in New Hampshire, I think that their product would be desirable. I'm sensitive to Senator Gray's comments about sort of the regional nature of solid waste management in the state. And I think that, again, one of the reasons we're supporting this bill is we do want these kinds of higher technologies that are higher up on the hierarchy than landfilling or incineration. We want them to exist in the state. And I would only be a little bit, I think the agency would be a little bit nervous about putting any kind of a requirement on these facilities that might kind of have the opposite effect of what the bill's trying to do, which is try to make the state attractive for siting and operation of these kinds of facilities. So I would want to, I think, approach that carefully, but certainly I think some language to encourage it would be welcomed.
Senator Guida with a question.
Mr. Chairman, Mike, are these plastics segregatable for the purposes of being, transformed into something usable by these plants?
Sure, there's two ways that happens. In sort of on the very local scale, a number of New Hampshire towns have a transfer station. Residents bring their trash to the transfer station and may be asked to source separate it. So they're putting different plastics or aluminum or bottles or glass bottles into separate containers. Those facilities actually do very well because it's all source separated. They can then bale those plastics. They can instruct their citizens to separate however they want them to, and then they can bale a product that's really suitable to the market. So that's one way that happens. That's kind of a manual way, but it's kind of the way it happens in a lot of rural in New Hampshire. The other way is for these, like in New Hampshire, I live in Concord, and we just have single source. So all the recyclables, paper, glass, aluminum, plastic, all the plastics that we recycle go into one container, and they go off to a materials recovery facility in Massachusetts and get sorted and baled into their various, component parts. The technologies used at those materials recovery facilities, or a MRF as they call them, are very capable of, setting those in or separating those into appropriate categories and baling them. So I would envision that a facility like this that, let's say, took a broad variety of plastics might take bales from MRFs and might also take bales from, New Hampshire municipalities that bail them themselves. Many of them go through the Northeast Resource Recovery Facility or agency, so they basically kind of take advantage of the scale by aggregating different towns' materials and then going through and getting a better price for their materials. So I could see them continuing to do that and then sending these kind of sorted materials to a facility such as one of these.
Thank you. So we get a lot of our landfill stuff from out of state, 50%, I think. Would this impact that waste stream? And could we require, or do we require, them to segregate these plastics out of the waste stream that's coming to our landfills?
We do not currently require, no one is required as a matter of law to separate recyclables under state law before landfilling. That could be done. There are states that have passed laws just like that say you got to go through a separation step first and make sure that certain kinds of recyclables are not contained in that waste. So that's something the legislature could consider, but it's not something that's currently on the books.
All right.
Other questions?
One more. Different subject, last question. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the lines 11 and 12 on the amendment, failure to comply may result in classification as a processing and treatment under the environmental SW 1000. Right. So I would make an assumption, this is my question, that there are escalating steps prior to that reclassification. In other words, warnings and cautions and so forth.
Well, thank you for the question, and I actually think that the language that DES provided in this process, in some respects, was more favorable to the sponsors, the folks who are advocating for this, than maybe they realize. Because when I look at this, I see that language kind of sends us down a road we don't want to go down, because it could, if you had a problem managing the waste, you keep it simple, you get it out of there, and it's done, right? And we're back to where we were. But if you implement that last line, now all of a sudden this facility goes from being regulated in a certain format as a manufacturing facility, and now suddenly it's thrust back into the solid waste realm completely. And that wasn't what we were looking for when we were commenting to them. And I'll just, for clarity's sake, I'll read to you what the language we suggested was really more focused on addressing the specific problem that I described to you earlier. And it would have said something like this: the department is authorized to enter and inspect any advanced recycling facility to determine whether the storage of post-use polymers or recovered feedstocks poses a substantial threat to human health or the environment. The department may utilize its enforcement authorities under 149M15 to address any such identified threats. So it's very narrow. It's just saying we first of all, it's a high bar. We have to go in and find out that these materials are being stored in a way that poses a substantial threat. And then if we find that, it just gives us the authority to use our existing authorities under the solid waste statute to address the problem. It doesn't thrust the facility back into the solid waste realm.
Do you use that same standard with other manufacturing organizations?
No, this would be unique, and the reason that I suggested it is that, and basically, and here's the difference. If this were not a facility that was taking recycled plastics, it would be taking raw polymers from the chemical manufacturing industry. There'd be no food and beverage residues. There'd be none of these things that make us want to call something a solid waste, that can have nuisance impacts associated with solid waste. So we don't need that authority in a manufacturing facility, because when they take it in, they're not going to have something that's going to attract rats and mice and that sort of thing. They're just going to have polymer that they bring in. We can certainly regulate that manufacturing facility appropriately through the waste it generates, the activities, the air emissions that it might emit. This is unique because what they're doing here is they're saying, here's a facility where the scenario I described is already addressed under our authorities under solid waste law, and they want to take that away. And we're saying, we understand why you want to take that away, and we're actually supportive of that because we think it's worth it. And we think the risks are low, and we think it's worth it to try to encourage these kind of facilities being sited in the state. But in the event that something goes wrong, and sometimes it does, you know, and it's all great until it isn't great, right? And so this would just mean that, okay, we gave you all the breaks you needed, but if you manage these wastes in a way that poses a threat and impacts your neighbors, we just want to have our authorities come in and fix it. That's all it really is.
Mike, if a manufacturer generates a lot of this waste, how does that apply to them then? I mean, for instance, you've got a company out there that generates a lot of this plastic that's not recyclable because it comes, their raw materials come in these plastics, then they're going to throw them away. How are they treated?
If they are, sure, basically on the tail end of a manufacturing operation, any manufacturer is subject to solid waste rules and hazardous waste rules. Now, they're not a solid waste facility. So every manufacturing facility obviously generates solid waste. They contract to have it picked up and appropriately disposed of. There's not very much that applies to them in terms of how they store that because they're not a facility that's receiving waste. The difference here is this is a facility that's taking and receiving what now is regulated as a solid waste under current law, and may have some problems associated with it. But basically, if well, I'll give you an example. Let's say that it's a little far-fetched, but let's say a facility had a lot of plastic waste that was contaminated with beverage because they had a big cafeteria, they had a lot of employees, and they had a lot of plastic waste that was contaminated with food and beverage waste, and they dumped it out in the back of their lot, and it created the same kind of problem I described to you. We would have the authority to go in and address the conditions at that facility because they would be then mismanaging solid waste.
And these facilities can't be held under the same standard?
This bill, its explicit purpose is to exempt them from that. It says these materials are not a solid waste. That's the first thing that the bill does. So that's why I'm raising again, it's not something that keeps me awake at night, but that's why I'm raising the concern.
Are we straining at an ad on this one or just anticipating like the ultimate like problem versus the benefit of this bill? You know, I'm looking at some of the waste that's coming into New Hampshire. Is some of that waste the plastics that this company would or this bill would want to recycle?
Right now, that's unlikely because any waste that were collected and baled and ready for the market shouldn't be coming to New Hampshire because there's no place to bring them. You wouldn't, if you had a commodity like that, you wouldn't just send it to a landfill.
Is there incentive for local municipalities because of the cost of sending those plastics out of state? Say, hey, heck with it. We're just going to bury it.
Well, there was a period of time in the last few years where recycling processing costs were very high and the value of recycled commodities was very low as a result of the China sword policy and everything that happened around that. That's been turning around. Commodities prices have come back. There were a handful of municipalities who just chose to dispose of their recyclables because it was costing them more to send them to a materials recovery facility. But most, I think, knew that it was a bump in the market, it was a bump in the road, and they continued doing it. And now, actually, the commodities prices have come back very strong.
So in your opinion, that they're not putting them into the landfills anymore?
There's no doubt that some materials that could be recycled are going into the landfill. You know, the whole question of recycling is a big universe, right?
Mhm.
And there are certain recyclable commodities that are very, lucrative to recycle. You know, for example, in Concord, where I live, we're encouraged to separate PETE, number one, recyclables, and number two, HDPE, because those are valuable plastic commodities. We're instructed to put those in our single sort. They go off to a materials recovery facility, get separated and baled, and they go into recycling markets. 3s, 4s, 5s, and 6s, they tell us to put them in the trash because there isn't really a market for them that is lucrative enough to make it worth the while. So they end up going into the regular trash.
So they are going into the trash, basically. If they're sealed in a bag and thrown into the dumpster, nobody's taking that bag apart.
Oh, no,
separating.
of course not. No. What I'm suggesting is that those are in fact going to landfill. Absolutely.
So our landfills, and that basically ends, that quickens the clock on the landfill's usefulness over time, if
Sure.
that's constantly going on. Another question, and I hope the committee doesn't mind me doing this for a second, because this is my bill. When these plastics are sent to Massachusetts, obviously, in the region, there isn't one of these types of facilities. So what does Massachusetts do with those 5s and 6s and whatever?
There are a number of outlets for these. And I'm familiar, I don't know if they're still doing it. There was a facility on the seacoast that took PETE and manufactured it into recycled PETE and manufactured it into automotive headliners and carpets. So there are, and any number of, you look Trex decking, you look at all these various recycled plastic products that are on the market. That's where those things go. They go to those manufacturing facilities too.
But in our region, we don't have any facilities like this at this point, correct?
Well, I'm not aware of, and I'm sure there are some in the region. It depends. I guess it depends. There's parts of the description, and the advocates of this bill could speak to this better than I could. There are parts of this that talk about pretty sophisticated chemical manufacturing processes where you're taking in these plastics and kind of breaking them down to their basic monomers and then generating some kind of a product ready for further manufacturing. Other parts of it could certainly be read to be much less sophisticated than that, where they would just be, I think as I read it, Trex decking would fall into this kind of category. And so there are a lot of existing technologies that probably fit this, but there are others where it's more sophisticated and there's a lot more going on chemically that I'm not aware of facilities here in New Hampshire.
It's my understanding that the language we have right now is basically adopted by like 15 other states, what we have right now in the language. My question is there a lot of these companies that have gone belly up?
I don't know. I really know very little. I don't want to for a moment suggest that I think these facilities are at risk of that. All I was doing was trying to give you an example because we do occasionally, we have some bad stories about things that have gone wrong at companies. Any company can fall on hard times, and managing materials when you don't have any money is very difficult, and there's not much incentive.
Granted on that. But right now, if we saw that there was a problem, there could be a legislative fix in the future.
Presumably, yeah. I mean, you can always find a legislative fix.
But as an enabling language to get something started so that people can start looking at New Hampshire, this would be like an ideal situation to at least open that door and conversation and look at the prospects of developing a manufacturing business like this in New Hampshire.
To be clear, DES is supportive of the bill.
Yes, sir. I
Absolutely.
want to emphasize that. Senator Gray.
Senator brought up, profitability, really. And I have always been told that a lot of these distance from the treatment facility, affects whether it can be profitable or not. I mean, the cost of diesel, the cost of labor, the cost of, and all of these in New Hampshire, it would appear would make it more financially feasible in the more populated areas and less feasible as we move north. Would you agree with all of that?
Well, it's certainly the case that being close to your supply is as a general rule is a helpful thing. I think it could, I don't think it's beyond the realm that a facility like this could be sited in the north, because to the extent that, you know, we don't know what this facility would look like. It might take a very specific sector of recyclables that may be available in Canada or, you know, in northern New England. So I don't think it's beyond the realm that this could have an impact anywhere in the state.
Senator Waters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mike, do you have any indication as to why the language you proposed was not used in this amendment?
I've not had a conversation with the folks who are working on this about that. I just know they didn't like my language.
Mr. Chairman, maybe, I mean, you know, it's your amendment, but I don't know if there's anyone from the industry who objected to that, or we could have them back to talk, or to speak
Well, we'll have
more,
to
or?
look at it.
All right,
There'll be the last
I'll wait,
speakers, and
I'll wait.
I did look at 3 different options, and actually that was my choice as far as the language, because I want to get this ball rolling. And if I look too far into the future, I feel as though we could just end up stifling any progress. We could get a bill, but nobody would want to look at the state. Senator Gaddis.
Thank you. I would disagree, respectfully. I think that what I heard from Mike was that this language gives them no option except a draconian option in dealing with a potential violation. And that the language they propose gives them a much broader ability, much less draconian, to deal with offenders. And so I would strongly suggest that we look at taking DES's language, because it makes it more likely or less unlikely that manufacturers will locate here because of the possibilities of draconian results.
And listening to Mike in regards to the way other manufacturers are, once they generate the solid waste, they're treated differently. So they can generate it and leave it in their backyard and be treated differently than the people that are receiving it and transferring it into a product that is usable.
Well, this is a different kind of solid waste. It's got food waste in it, so.
Not just necessarily food waste, but any type of manufacturing was my general question. Is that correct?
I'm not sure I understand what you just said, Senator.
Well,
I'm
I do.
sorry. I know you.
That's all I meant. No, I'm kidding. Senator Waters.
Thank you. It seemed to me, Mike, that the nub of what you had proposed was the ability to inspect.
Correct.
And
For a very specific purpose.
yeah, for a very specific, but would it be fair to say that, you know, part of the caution here is that New Hampshire has been through a heck of a lot over what has happened, you know, whether it's St. Cobain or elsewhere, the MBTE, that, you know, we've had experience where if we didn't inspect, didn't know, there have been dire consequences. So wouldn't it make sense at least to let DES be able to inspect, to head off problems before they become problems?
Well, and again, I think I want to be clear. Really, what the department suggested for language, we believe is very narrow. It was not saying we want the ability to go and inspect your whole factory. I mean, we probably possess the ability because of the things that will happen at this manufacturing facility. You know, if they generate any hazardous waste, which they could, then we have an authority to inspect under that. If they have an air emissions, which they might well, we would have the authority to inspect under that. With the language that DES was suggesting for this bill is not about that kind of in-plant inspection. This is looking at a very narrow condition, which we think is really the only concern we have about this bill, is that if you had, and again, maybe it's a little, you know, dramatic, if you had 3 acres of baled plastics that got abandoned because the facility went belly up, and there are, you know, all kinds of vermin running around, and which is, by the way, that's not far-fetched. We have had solid waste facilities where that is the exact problem, and we get calls from people who say there are rats in my shed, what's going on? And then in those cases, we had very clear authority to go and address that problem very promptly. In this case, we could have a significant problem like that, and as I read the bill currently, there would be nothing we could really do about it. We wouldn't have the authority to even go evaluate it, and if we did determine that it was a problem, we would almost always use our solid waste authority to address something like that. We would not have it because these materials are not solid waste. And what I was just suggesting is this would be to narrow the ability, if we get that kind of a problem that's brought to our attention, we could go and look at it. It probably wouldn't even require an in-plant inspection. It would be an outdoor inspection. And if we saw that that was really what was going on, we would be able to use our solid waste authorities to fix it, which would be probably to either issue an order that they remove those materials to a proper disposal facility, or whatever it might be, or you know, if we had to use, you know, legal civil proceedings through the Department of Justice. But that would be it. That's really the only purpose of it. And the problem I have with the language that's in here is I'm not even sure that with the language they've suggested that it really, it does not explicitly say, well, then your authorities kick in again. It just says you'll call the facility a processing and treatment facility. And I guess you could infer that that means that it's really solid waste and you can use your authorities. But it just seems to me that, and the other thing is there are parts of those universal facility standards that might, if they were to apply after the fact, it would be impossible for the facility to comply with them because the way they're built, structured, their setbacks and everything else might not comply anymore. And I don't think that's what these folks want. So my feeling is that what the department suggested here is actually a more desirable, more sort of surgical way to address this problem than what's in the proposed amendment. But again, I mean, we support the bill. If it got passed as it's written, we'll live with it and see where we land.
And there's no plants in New Hampshire or in the region that are like this anywhere at this point.
Not that I'm aware of.
That are struggling with this particular issue.
No, not that I'm aware of.
Senator Gray.
So if we blended the current words that send us out to ENVSW, what, 1,000, and we blend it with an or in the words that you have, which gave us, I think it was an RSA citation.
Right.
You could live with that?
Sure. The RSA citation just refers to our broad enforcement authorities under the solid waste statute.
And with an or?
The words matter, so I'd have to look at the sentence, but certainly we'd be happy to work with the committee and others to develop that, if that's the will of the committee.
Okay. Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. Craig Cookson. Welcome.
On here, great. Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Avard, Senator Waters, and members of the committee. My name is Craig Cookson. I'm the Senior Director of Plastic Sustainability at the American Chemistry Council. American Chemistry Council is a national trade association representing the U.S. chemical industry, including the leading manufacturers of plastic resins. ACC is an expert resource on innovative plastics recycling programs to improve plastic circularity nationwide. ACC strongly encourages the committee to support New Hampshire's interest in ensuring that greater amounts of our post-use packaging materials, especially plastics, are recycled and converted into feedstocks for new plastics and other useful products. So I'm really pleased to be here today. I'm a native of southwestern New Hampshire. I grew up in Keene, went to Keene High, Blackbird. My father worked at Kingsbury Corporation for 27 years, so I truly understand the value of good manufacturing jobs in a community. It gets me a little sad to think about, Kingsbury. It was such a big fixture in the community. My mother worked at Keene State College for 15 years as well. So love New Hampshire. I'm glad to be back. The roads were a little bit dicey last night. I've lost some of my snow driving skills, I think, but I'm really happy to hear today, and I want to talk. I was just at one of these facilities yesterday in Akron, Ohio. Beautiful facility, so I'm really looking forward to the committee's questions to talk about some of the misconceptions, I think, and sort of separate. We need to think about this as innovative manufacturing and not as solid waste, so we need to break that paradigm. So we strongly support SB 367, as it will ensure advanced recycling technologies are regulated as manufacturing facilities here in New Hampshire. Advanced recycling helps us decrease plastic waste and support continued progress towards zero waste and sustainability goals for our communities. Residents of New Hampshire will have opportunity to recycle greater amounts and types of plastics packaging. Advanced recycling takes hard to recycle plastics and refers to several different technologies that convert used plastics into their original building blocks to produce new plastics, waxes, and other valuable products of chemistry. Right now, New Hampshire and much of the United States does a fairly good job of mechanically recycling our soda and water bottles, as well as milk jugs, detergent bottles, and some tubs and lids. However, it is challenging to mechanically recycle complexly engineered packaging, such as pouches and tubes. These plastics greatly reduce food waste, and keep our food supply fresh. Very important, right? Food is a huge contributor of waste to greenhouse gas emissions. As well as think about the sanitary, life-saving medical supply packaging and test kits that have proven so important during this pandemic. Rather than burying these valuable plastics resources in a landfill or burning them for energy, thanks to advanced recycling, these plastics can be economically recycled and converted to a versatile mix of products, including feedstocks for new chemicals and plastics. And let me state clearly for the record what these technologies are not. They're not waste disposal. They're not handling waste. This is a feedstock or raw material, and they're not incineration. And I'll be happy to discuss again more about how these technologies work during the Q&A. Another misconception out there is that these technologies only produce fuel, but the output can be used in a variety of different products, pretty widely recognized products right now. Just recently, Wendy's, so feel free to Google this after the committee. Who doesn't love Wendy's, right? Announced that they were switching from their lined paper cups to an all-plastic cup made with 20% recycled plastics thanks to advanced recycling. Herbal Essence, one of the highest profile brands of Procter & Gamble, has announced a partnership with Eastman to produce 5 shampoo and conditioner bottles made from 50% certified recycled plastic, again, thanks to advanced recycling technologies. Finally, it's important to also discuss how these technologies are and will be regulated. As manufacturers, they are subject to a litany of federal, state, and local environmental regulations. Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, etc. We strongly encourage New Hampshire to seize this opportunity to recycle more types and greater amounts of plastics using technological innovation. I think just one observation from the past questions, it sounds like the plastics all go out of state and the jobs for remanufacturing them are all created elsewhere. So it'd be nice to do it here. 15 states now, including Pennsylvania, have enacted legislation encouraging recycling technologies, advanced recycling technologies to take up roots in their states. Neighboring states in New Jersey, Rhode Island, New York have also introduced similar legislation and are also looking how they can bring more advanced manufacturing to their states. So I want to thank you for your time today, and I'm happy to take any questions from the committee.
Questions from the committee? Senator Waters.
Yeah, I was a little confused by your testimony because you seem to imply that this plant will only process industrial post-manufacturing products rather than solid waste derived plastics.
No,
all right,
that wasn't
just a misstatement you made. Okay, I just wanted to be sure that that's what we were talking about. You know, I mean, the Akron plant, I've seen some information about it. Interesting manufacturing plant. It seems to me that you heard what the Department of Environmental Services was saying. That look, you know, that they think this is a good bill. It's a good way to go in this classification, but they'd like to have just an out to be able to do perhaps some inspection of problems rather than using this hammer, because if they have to come in after you've been in operation for 5 years and say, poof, you're no longer a manufacturing facility, you're a solid waste facility, it's going to shut down, right?
Yep.
So do you have any objection to kind of to incorporating some of that language?
So we've been working with the department. I think that I want to make that clear from the beginning. We've had several conversations with the team, with Mike and others. They had sent over some language, and we've been kind of working through iterations. I think one of the concerns that we had, and I think is a red flag for sort of any company doing business in New Hampshire, is I think there was a term substantial threat to environment or human health. I mean, that's so broad. Does that mean one bottle cap that roll across the floor, right? So as a legislature, we would prefer sort of tighter language, right? That's more prescriptive as opposed to granting the department, almost carte blanche authority to say, well, this represents a substantial threat, but we don't know what that is. So any companies, think about a company coming into this state, right? They need to, number one, they need to select a site, right? Where can they operate? So they're going to need to work with the community, of course, talk about the jobs they're going to create, make sure it's suitably permitted for that. They're going to need to work with MRFs and other, Stop and Shop and others, Hannaford, to get plastics, make sure they have a supply of plastics. They're going to need to work with their offtake, right? So once they turn this into a feedstock, who's going to take it from them? And so the most important thing is to have a transparent, predictable regulatory framework. And so anything that might say, hey, if a bottle cap rolls across the floor, we can deem that a substantial threat and shut you down. That would be a concern. So we're happy to work with the department, but we'd like something that I think that's a little bit more prescriptive.
Yeah, if I may follow up. I mean, I think we know nobody's talking about bottle cap. We heard the concerns as stated there, and I guess what I'm trying to say is that I think it would be very helpful to your cause because you basically won your argument. but, you know, you've got to understand what we've been through in New Hampshire.
Yep.
That if you could work with them to incorporate some of that originally proposed language, I think that it would be non-burdensome.
Yep.
But also helpful, because it's not just that you're helping potentially the people who might be impacted if something goes wrong, but you've got to seem to be helping the industry, because, you know, if somebody comes in under this language and says, well, we think, you know, also we think under environmental SW 1000, you got to, that this plant has broken its rules and it needs to be regulated under that, you're out of business, right? So I just hope you will have some conversation.
Yeah, we'll be happy to take a look at any language.
Senator Gaida.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Would you be comfortable with the suggestion that Senator Gray made to incorporate the language that Mike Wimsatt had suggested, and an or between this language and that?
I'd have to kind of, I can't sort of see it in my head. I'd have to look at it.
So my advice would be, if you haven't done so, do so.
Yeah.
Further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much for your testimony. And anybody else want to comment on this bill? Seeing none, we're going to close the hearing. And we'll listen to the prime sponsor of SB 429. Is there a sign-up sheet for this? 429? This isn't it. You're recognized, Senator Gaida.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'll do my best to catch us back up on time, but I think it's a futile effort. I'm Bob Gaida, prime sponsor of 429 FN. This is a bill that came out of a committee that studied the SEC and its processes this past summer. This is one of two. This committee has already addressed one for the longer term, to establish a study committee to look at the entire process, integration with energy, the Energy Department and siting and so forth, the SEC. This bill was looked at as a short-term fix until the results of that study can come back with a long-term plan to improve the siting process. And so it's meant to expedite, streamline, and so forth. The current process has a number of recommendations. Those are enumerated under the analysis section on the front page. I know that we reduced the quorum. We don't require commissioners to attend, obviously trying to get a number of commissioners into a meeting given their busy schedule, so we allow designees. And we just said reduce the quorum from 7 to 5 as well. We require training. We establish requirements for training. Very important, right? Because very complex issues that they deal with. Legal training by the Department of Justice, and training regarding energy infrastructure conducted by the newly formed Department of Energy. There's been expressed concern. I'm not sure if Commissioner Scott is here. He is. He will express some concerns about the bill. I'll allow him to do that. And we also were very attentive to the public's outcry almost of better communications. And apparently in the past, the communications have not been that good, notifications of meetings and so forth. As we state in this bill, as introduced, on page 2, line 2, at all hearings and public meetings, except for deliberative sessions, we go on to require an opportunity for the public to ask questions. Members of the committee can refrain from answering questions that might indicate any form of a prejudice towards an outcome. I think that clause, subject to Commissioner Scott's comments, might need to be reviewed and amended. We changed the applications fees, $60,000 base charge, $20,000 for certificate monitoring compliance. And again, we go through the list of changes to costs and fees. We require those monitoring compliance charges to go into the site evaluation fund and not be non-lapsing. One of the problems that the SEC has been funding. And that's because it's a sporadic nature of these applications that come in. It's not a consistent one per month. Sometimes it's none for 2 years or 3, and then all of a sudden 4 in 1 month. So that variability produces problems with funding for the commission, or the committee. And so again, we try to address that here with the language in the bill. We start to try to integrate the Department of Energy into the process. Which I think ultimately the long-term bill that we heard earlier this year will formulate a formal process of what they do specifically and what the SEC does, what the PUC might do, and so forth. Again, that's to be studied, but what we're trying to do with this bill is to streamline the current process, and I'll take any questions.
Questions from the committee? Senator Waters.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And, thank you, Senator. I mean, you know, that committee did a good job. It came up with a lot of reasonable recommendations. And in terms of the fees, too, isn't it fair to say that we've heard over the years that this is increasingly complex for the department and increasingly costly, and that the principle is that we would like those folks coming forward to get approvals rather than taxpayers to pick that up. And is that fair to say in terms of the need for that? Yeah.
That's correct.
And just one follow-up. On page 2, down in line 30, we've got this new addition there, the 1,200 per megawatt for renewable energy generation facilities, which is certainly timely because we have now authorized these up to 5 megawatts in various circumstances, and that number that you have there is in accordance with line 25 above, so level playing field.
Correct.
Thank you.
Further questions? Seeing none, thank you, Senator. We'll hear from Josh Elliott.
Senator, it's just if there were any questions of the committee, don't have any, department doesn't have any testimony on this bill, but just make yourselves available if there are questions.
All right, any questions from the committee? Seeing none. Bob, if you want. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Bob Scott. I'm Commissioner with the Department of Environmental Services and Vice Chair by statute of the Site Evaluation Committee. If I could indulge, I wanted to point out Dan Goldner is somewhere, but there he is actually the new, relatively new, chair of the PUC and therefore by statute chair of the SEC. I've also brought with me the head of my legal unit at New Hampshire DES, who was the former administrator, the position is now vacant, of the Site Evaluation Committee, Pam Monroe. And I brought here, to the extent you would want to ask questions of historical, what's happened and that type of thing, in case you would like to do that. I will offer that to the extent this bill were to go to a work session or anything like that, we can certainly make ourselves available. So quickly, for my testimony, and thank you, Senator, for recognizing my concerns too, as we discussed. By and large, wholeheartedly support the bill, both its efforts to streamline the existing Site Evaluation Committee process, but also, as the Senator alluded to, the long-term goal of perhaps streamlining even more, and that's consistent with the testimony I gave over the summer into the fall to the work group, I guess it was. So more particularly I do have concerns with, as the Senator mentioned, with regarding page 2, lines 2 through 7. I'll start, and again, Ms. Monroe can elaborate if you would wish. The SEC process currently has many opportunities for public process, including a requirement for a hearing in the county where the project is. Typically, it's in the town if it's not a project that spans a large area. There's the statute currently has, until the record is closed, and that's a key issue, it requires the committee to take into account not only what we've heard at hearings and in the adjudicative sessions, but also anything we've received in public comments, either orally or in writing. So that kind of, to me, is already there. There's a lot of public process. My biggest concern, twofold on this language, it would kind of extend that public process. So once the site evaluation committee issues a decision, there's an appeal process. They can go to the Supreme Court. Sometimes they do. There's a defined process. This addition would basically put us, in my opinion, a never-ending litigation process, and that's really a concern for me. I think both the public and the applicants, the developers in this case, deserve some finality, and this seems to allow for it to continue to be opened as a process. There's also, I think, and I'll let the attorneys of the world opine, I'm an engineer, the questioning of the committee members itself, I think, can be problematic. I see, obviously, there's some language in here to try to help dull the bias and that type of thing, but I just see that all as a little bit unworkable. And so, again, I brought Pam here to the extent the committee wants to delve into what public process is already there. We're happy to elaborate on that. So I appreciate the opportunity.
Would it be easier just to strike that language from 3 to 7?
That would be my recommendation, but and that's really what I'm here to ask for, I guess.
Page 2? Yeah. It's Senator Guida?
I think during the summer, during the committee hearing, we heard that the communications to the public were not either timely or well published. And so I think we may be able to address a lot of this by, if it doesn't already exist, and I'm not familiar with the process, a requirement, a mandate to put communications about the hearings and so forth out earlier to interested parties. I think, as you said, it's already required that their input be put into the record.
Right.
So there's no need to address that. It's just how we make sure that we're perceived as and actually do maintain a level of transparency before the hearings by getting the notices out early. I mean, that came through pretty loud and clear to me.
And I don't disagree watching the past history. I will say, I get the past administrator behind me, who I think did a very good job on all those things. I do think the lack of an administrator position being filled kind of lended to that. It became an additional duty for some others that I'm not criticizing as much as I know. Again, I don't want to speak for the chair. He's actively recruiting for somebody to take that position, and I do think you'll find that will solve, if not all, most of those problems administratively.
So striking the language on page 2 from 3 to 7, is that the only concern that you have?
Yes, and again, as the senator knows, I sat with the chair at the time, Senator Guida, and some members of the House on crafting this, and we're certainly supportive of it.
And you feel that this would streamline the whole process a lot?
This is a important step. I think there's more to be done, to be blunt, more than you want to know. But what I testified for in my ideal world is, for my agency, for instance, we have a very defined regulatory process with appeal process, with oversight by, depending on the program, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and U.S. EPA, and then to overlay that yet again with the SEC, to me, seems very unnecessary and duplicative. So my argument would be the ultimate goal to me for an SEC would be to address those things that are not already covered by existing regulation, for instance, noise, aesthetics, those type of things. Those aren't the easy things, but why have the belt, suspenders, and duct tape was my testimony. So.
Duct tape was great, but Senator Waters.
Did you have another one? Yeah, Commissioner, it seems to me on that page 2, if we did strike that what might be helpful is if you came up with some language after, on line 2, hearings that deemed necessary and appropriate, and ensure adequate public notice prior to meetings, or just something. I mean, you want to do that anyways, but I think having it here would maybe be helpful. So I don't know, Senator Guida and Commissioner Scott, but maybe just a phrase there, because that's the site evaluation process is, for some people, just so extraordinarily important. We've seen that, and and people are anxious and want to make sure that they can get there and all that. And I think that this would be helpful if we're gonna be revising the way the committee functions it's more than a nod, but it's an acknowledgement that people were concerned about.
I would argue it's a requirement anyways, under 541A and
Yeah,
other things,
but still.
but I have no objection to that,
Yeah,
sure.
so maybe a phrase there would help.
Senator Gatta? That all? Did you want to have a question? Okay. All right, thank you for your testimonies.
Thank you all.
I saw Eversource grab the sheet, so any questions? Donna? No? Okay, just if you had any concerns. Anybody else want to speak on this bill? Seeing none, we'll close the hearing. And, I mean, we can exec it if you want.
Yeah, I think I have a phrase, and if you want, I'll move exec.
What? Okay.
Second.
Yeah. Commissioner.
Commish. All in favor of exec? Say aye. Any opposed? Seeing none, okay. Discussion on the bill. First, is there a motion on the bill?
Ought to pass as amended.
We haven't amended it yet.
I'll second.
All right. All right, discussion.
I'll move amendment.
Is there language we want to strike first?
6, but with this addition.
You want to do a committee amendment?
Yeah, okay, I move a committee amendment. That will be this amendment, and then strike lines 2, beginning at all hearings through line 7. And then add on line 2, as it deems necessary and appropriate, comma, and ensure adequate and timely public notice.
Should we reference 541 or no? No, that wouldn't necessarily.
No.
Yeah.
So it's and ensure, comma, and ensure adequate and timely public notice. Does that get it, Bob?
I have a question
Yeah.
to council.
If I may, yeah, I think, so 541A would apply for the adjudicative proceedings, but RSA 91A would apply for the public meetings of the committee, and I think that was part of the concern that I heard. I attended with the commissioner this summer, that it was for the public meetings of the committee. So I believe there's also a bill this session, I think it's a House bill that would actually require public comment prior to a public meeting of a public body. So, so for the public meeting aspect, you probably want to reference 91A for the adjudicative proceeding, 541A.
Is that necessary in this bill to notice that?
So
I would first ask clearly what's the requirement of 91A as far as notice?
I believe it's 48 hours.
I don't think that's adequate. I really don't. I would say 7 days or 14 days is something that's important to go out as far as notice. And so, you know, I think 2 days is not enough. If people have schedules, they have businesses to run and so forth, and then you're talking about energy siting, you've got a lot of people at different constituencies.
So for the public meetings, that would be 91A, it would be 48 hours. And I believe, like I said, I think that was the concern. I don't know off the top of my head. I can tell you for the adjudicative proceedings that I managed previously, you know, for the actual dockets for the certificates, we gave a lot, you know, extensive notice. We had a service list for each of those proceedings. It was a lengthy list. I can tell you there were over 200 people on that list for the Northern Pass. So they got prior notice of those hearings. Again, I don't know if that was part of the problem here, where they didn't notice the right people that were interested in a specific facility or not. I think that may have been part of the
I agree with that.
concern.
But I still don't think 2 days is enough.
So augmenting it another 7 days or up to 7 days as far as notification, that doesn't really just bog this whole thing down, does it? All right. So can we put that, can we wordsmith that into this?
So I guess what I would say then, if I may, and
Turn your mic on.
Your mic's not on.
thank you. And in addition, so same line too, and in addition to the requirements under 91A, ensure adequate and timely public notice of 7 days.
7 days public notice.
Yeah, adequate and timely. So what was it, Bob? 7 days?
I would just say, after appropriate, we think is necessary and appropriate, and ensure 7-day public notice of all meetings.
Yeah, I think we need to reference 91A. I think say, and in addition to the requirements of under 91A.
Daley, you want to read that back to me, what you have?
Yeah, so we're striking, starting in lines 2 through 7, and we're going to be adding, in addition to the requirements under 91A, we're going to ensure adequate and timely public notice, 7 days. No.
Of 7 days.
We're good?
Calendar days?
Calendar day?
Up to 7 calendar days.
You don't want up to.
No.
Of 7 calendar days.
No less than.
No less than.
No less than.
How about more than? No less than, no more than.
No less than 7 days.
All right, one more time.
All right, so, yeah, striking line, 2 through 7, we're adding, in addition to the requirements under 91A, we're going to ensure adequate and timely public notice of no less than 7 calendar days.
All
We
in
good?
agreement?
We good?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Aye?
Aye.
All right, and anything else? All right, so is there a motion to,
Move the amendment?
Well, now it's now ought to, that we just voted on the amendment. Now you want to move on to pass as amended.
Yes, thank you.
And I'll second it.
all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none. Is there a motion?
Do you want consent, Bob, or you want to talk about it?
Motion to consent?
Consent's fine.
Second.
All in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, it goes on consent. Who wants to take this out? No. All right, it's a motion to move out of consent, out of,
You don't want to exec anything else?
not right now. No.
Okay, good.
Yeah, and all in favor of moving out of exec?
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none? Thank you, we're done.